bread prices in America just jumped 11%. Not because of a drought, not because of a failed harvest, because Donald Trump picked a fight with the wrong country over the wrong product at the worst possible time. And Mark Carney, Canada's Prime Minister, just taught him a lesson about food security that will echo for decades. Here's what happened. Trump slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian wheat. Standard playbook: apply pressure, force concessions, declare victory. Except this time, Canada didn't blink. They didn't negotiate. They didn't beg for exemptions. Instead, Carney redirected Canadian wheat to Mexico, China, and Brazil. And now, American flour mills are in crisis mode, scrambling to explain to bakeries why costs are skyrocketing, while Canadian wheat trains roll through the United States without stopping, headed south to Mexico City. This is the story of how a commodity Trump thought was negotiable became the weapon that proved America needs Canada far more than Canada needs America. And it all comes down to one number: 90%.
90% of all wheat imported into the United States comes from Canada. Let me put that in perspective. America imports roughly 120 million bushels of wheat every year. Canada supplies almost all of it. Not out of charity, not because of NAFTA nostalgia, because Canadian wheat has something American wheat doesn't: the exact protein content, gluten characteristics, and quality standards that U.S. flour mills require to make their products. We're talking about spring wheat from Saskatchewan, durum from Manitoba, high-protein varieties that blend with lower-protein American winter wheat to create flour with consistent baking properties. The kind that makes your pizza crust crispy, your pasta firm, your sourdough rise perfectly. American millers spent decades building supply chains around this. They designed facilities specifically to process Canadian wheat, established quality control systems based on it, created entire product lines that depend on it, and then Trump imposed 25% tariffs anyway. The stated goal? Force Canada to lower dairy tariffs, scrap digital services taxes, submit to American trade priorities. The tariff was supposed to be leverage, a way to bring Canada to the negotiating table. Here's what it actually did. It added $196 million in costs overnight. Companies importing $5 million worth of Canadian wheat suddenly owed an extra $1.25 million. Flour mills faced an impossible choice: pay the tariff and raise prices, or find alternatives. There were no alternatives. Canada is the third largest wheat exporter in the world, behind Russia and the EU. In 2025, they produced 36 million tons. They exported 24 million tons to over 60 countries. Only a fraction went to the United States. Mark Carney did the math. Lose 2% of exports to a market that insults you weekly, or find new buyers who actually want what you're selling? The choice was obvious. Carney announced Canada would double non-U.S. exports over the next decade. When he first said it, it sounded ambitious, a distant policy goal. Then Trump kept threatening, kept insulting, kept pushing tariffs, and suddenly doubling non-U.S. exports became urgent national strategy. Mexico became the first target. Canadian Pacific Kansas City, the rail company connecting Canada and Mexico, celebrated the arrival of a unit train carrying Manitoba wheat to Mexico City. Carney personally attended, stood with railway executives and Mexican officials, called it proof that Canada has options. The symbolism was deliberate. Canadian wheat traveling through the United States without stopping, using American rail infrastructure as a land bridge while delivering product to Mexican buyers instead of American mills. But Carney wasn't done. China opened up as another destination. Carney negotiated deals removing tariffs on Canadian canola, seafood, and agricultural products. Wheat was part of the package. China is the world's largest wheat importer, 10 million tons annually. They buy mostly from Australia and France. Now Canadian wheat is competing for that market, with government support. Brazil became interested. South American buyers traditionally purchase from Argentina, but Canadian wheat offers higher protein and better quality. Carney pushed trade missions, arranged logistics, made it easier for Canadian exporters to ship south instead of across the border. And here's the kicker. While all this was happening, American flour mills were panicking because wheat isn't interchangeable. You can't just swap Canadian spring wheat with American winter wheat and expect the same results. Pasta requires durum. Canada produces 5.4 million tons of it. U.S. domestic durum production is limited. High-protein bread flour requires spring wheat with 14% protein content. Canadian prairies grow that naturally. You can't replicate decades of agricultural development by planting different seeds and hoping for the best. Carney gave a speech at the Canadian Club in Toronto. Let me quote him directly. "The decades-long process of ever closer economic relationship with the United States is over. Our strengths of being tied to America are now our vulnerabilities. Our economic strategy is to change rapidly." That wasn't rhetoric. That was policy. Canada spent decades building trade relationships under one assumption: that the United States would honor free trade agreements, respect supply chain integration, act like a reliable partner. Trump shredded those assumptions, called Canada a national security threat, publicly referred to it as the 51st state, insulted Carney by name. Carney stopped negotiating, stopped begging for exemptions, stopped treating the United States as the only market that matters. Instead, he built alternatives: wheat to Mexico, canola to China, Oil to Asia, energy to Europe. Every threat Trump made, Carney responded by finding another buyer.
The U.S. Trade Representative's Office published demands for Canada. 5 major items: dairy market access, digital services tax repeal, provincial alcohol barriers removed, procurement policy changes, energy policy adjustments. Carney refused every single one. Not out of stubbornness, because Trump had no leverage. Canada can sell wheat elsewhere. America cannot buy it elsewhere. Meanwhile, flour prices in the United States increased 11% in early 2025. Bread costs rose, pasta costs rose, baked goods costs rose. Not because of supply shortages, because tariffs added input costs for manufacturers. Flour mills pay the tariff. They pass costs to bakeries. Bakeries pass costs to grocery stores. Grocery stores pass costs to consumers. The person buying bread at Walmart doesn't know why it costs more. They just know it does, and they blame whoever's in charge. Trump promised to lower costs. Instead, his tariffs raised them. The administration tried blaming Canada, claimed Canadian suppliers were price gouging. Industry groups refuted that immediately. Prices rose because tariffs added costs. Basic economics. Here's what's fascinating. Carney didn't even need to retaliate with counter tariffs on wheat. Market forces did the work. American buyers paid more, Canadian sellers found other markets. U.S. consumers absorbed the difference. Trump quietly stopped mentioning wheat tariffs. No announcement, no reversal, just silence. The political costs were too obvious. Flour mills complained, bakeries complained, Republican senators started asking for exemptions. But Trump can't admit mistakes, so instead of reversing the policy, he just stopped enforcing it aggressively. Customs expedited shipments. Trade groups reported fewer delays. The tariff still exists on paper, but clearance improved. Carney noticed, didn't change strategy, because the damage was already done. U.S. buyers proved unreliable. Canadian exporters now need permanent alternatives. Let's talk about what food security actually means. It means your population can eat regardless of external shocks, wars, droughts, trade disputes, natural disasters. Countries that depend on imports for staple foods are vulnerable. Countries that produce staples domestically are secure. The United States produces enough wheat to feed itself, but not enough of the right kinds of wheat for all products. Pasta needs durum. Premium bread needs high-protein spring wheat. Those come from Canada. Tariffs don't change that reality. Trump gambled with food security. He assumed Canada would submit rather than lose American markets. He assumed American millers could find alternatives. He assumed consumers wouldn't notice price increases. He was wrong on all counts. Carney set a target: double non-U.S. exports by 2035. When he first announced it, it seemed ambitious. Now it seems inevitable. Because Trump handed Canada the motivation to diversify. Every threat, every insult, every tariff pushed Canadian exporters to find alternatives, and they found plenty. Canada now exports wheat to over 60 countries. Indonesia buys 2 million tons, the Philippines 1.5 million, Japan 1 million, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Thailand, Iraq, Yemen, Morocco, all want reliable supply, consistent quality, reasonable prices. Canadian wheat production hit record levels in 2025, 36 million tons. Abundant harvest, good weather, strong yields, more wheat than Canada can consume domestically, which means exports. The question is, where? Historically, 15 to 20% of Canadian wheat exports went to the United States. Small share, but valuable, because American millers paid premium prices for specific varieties. Trump's tariffs made that market unstable. So Canadian exporters looked elsewhere, found willing buyers, signed contracts, built relationships. The U.S. share of Canadian wheat exports is falling, not because Canada is punishing America, because Canadian farmers need reliable customers. Markets that don't threaten tariffs during every political dispute. Markets that respect trade agreements. Markets that pay on time and don't insult suppliers. And here's the broader pattern. Wheat isn't unique. Lumber, potash, oil, electricity, aluminum, every commodity follows the same cycle. Trump threatens, Canada finds alternatives, American industries panic, prices rise, Trump backs down, but the damage is done. Lumber mills ship more to Asia, potash to Brazil and India, oil to China. Each threat accelerates the trend.
Trump's biggest mistake was assuming Canada needed the United States more than the United States needs Canada. Wheat proved otherwise. America imports 90% of its wheat from Canada. Canada exports less than 20% of its wheat to America. The dependency runs north to south, not south to north. Mark Carney stood in Mexico City celebrating Canadian wheat exports, while American millers scrambled to find alternatives that don't exist, while U.S. consumers paid higher bread prices, while Trump's tariff policy collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions. Canada wins because it diversified trade, built relationships with reliable partners, and proved it can sell wheat, lumber, oil, and potash to countries that respect agreements. The United States loses because it raised food costs for its own population, destabilized supply chains, alienated its closest ally, and proved to the world that American trade policy is unreliable. Trump thought he could force Canada to beg. Instead, Carney redirected the wheat supply, found buyers who actually wanted it, and left America to explain why threatening your northern neighbor was worth higher bread prices. The wheat harvest in Saskatchewan continues, 36 million tons, shipping to 60 countries, just not as much to the United States anymore. Because Canada learned what Trump refuses to understand. You don't gamble with food security, you don't threaten the hand that feeds you, and you definitely don't assume your neighbor will beg when they have better options.